This is Chris Allison, and this is the Genesis Ag Podcast. We're here today with Genesis Ag President Phillip Davis, Vice President Josh Davis, and Product Specialist Mark Rothermich. We'll be listening to a segment today from a recent winter meeting with growers. The team will discuss Genesis Ag products you can implement for an immediate impact on your crops in 2022. Mark will be starting things off for us.
This morning, we wanted to talk about some of the other products that are going to have that impact predominantly in the year that we apply them. So let me run down through here real quick, guys. The first one we're going to talk this morning about is Invigor8. I think Invigorate is one of those products that you have quite a bit of history with and quite a bit of excitement for. Do you want to share a little bit?
We were looking at some data last night. Josh and I were from a researcher that we're working with down in Mississippi, Mark. And when I say this technology continues to perform, in his replicated study on 6 different locations, Josh, what was the numbers on that Invigorate?
One location was around 11 bushel for just the plain Invigorate, and that was in a 230 to 240 bushel environment.
That was irrigated, this researcher in Mississippi. This was irrigated corn. That was their yield, average yield of the control. Then when we added that many bushels and that. Again, Invigorate is a technology that is used. It doesn't mean that it's going to increase your yield. What we're doing here is just what the product calls. We're giving that seedling more vigor. It comes out of the ground with more energy. We see a faster shoot development, faster root development, but that doesn't always correlate to yield. But we're all looking at yield and saying, okay, if I do this, what am I going to get in return? And I say Invigorate is a really good insurance program for, let's say, $7 an acre or $7 per bag of seed, or however you wanted to say it. But to get good uniform emergence. And I know, Mark, you've worked with a lot of your customers where you've gone back out, looked at this technology, more plants per acre, more uniform stand. And that's what everyone's preaching, uniform stand, all of them up within 12 hours. And for me, this is just insurance to get that seedling out of the ground.
I like to refer to it as an energy shot for your seedling. I think that's a great way of explaining it. And you're right, Phillip, this is one of those products, if you really want to see how it's working, you've got to be out there early when those plants are emerging and initially. Not that you won't see impacts on that crop all the way through the season, bigger roots, stronger stalk, things like that, or a bigger plant even. I've seen all of those things all the way up to tasseling, but you really need to be out there early. Josh, share a little bit of your thoughts on that perspective.
Well, most definitely. Typically, most guys are going to treat their seed February, March, sometimes April, depending on when they get their seed. And they put it on there and then they mark it in their iPad that, hey, this is my Invigor8 check, or these are my Invigor8 strips if they do a split planter or whatnot. But yeah, once they put that seed in the ground, they're waiting 120, 140 days for results, not really thinking what the things on the list here that we're looking at promotes even emergence, increases germination, faster emergence, more uniform stands. We're not really out there looking at that. So my suggestion in looking at this is go out and make sure the product is performing, see the viability of it. What do we get now in a bag of seed, the guaranteed germ? It's somewhere in the high 80s, low 90s. And when we're putting 32,000 seed out there, it probably is an average rate for most guys. Look how many seeds we're losing. That could be 2,500, 3,000, sometimes over that. And even in the results that my dad and I were looking at last night, their target population was 34,000 in these plots, and their controls were down in the 30,000s and 31,000s. And where we treated with Invigorate or Invigorate Plus, we're pushing that 34,000. Was it exactly 34,000? No, because there's variables within that. but we're getting probably a 10 to 20% increase in viable seeds that we're putting out there. So if you look at your per seed cost, if it's 0.8 of a cent or whatever it be, we're increasing the efficiency of the money that the farmer's spending. So much if you know that you're successful with a 30,000 final stand, even though you're planting 32, how valuable would it be to maximize the seed you're putting out there? Yeah, that could be minuscule dollars and cents, but we're making everything more viable. So checking those early, popping the plant out of the ground at V2, V3, that could be extremely critical.
Mark, Josh makes a very valid point there, and you and I both have, I've been with you, and some people call them runts. I always say the juvenile plants when you go out there. And I'm talking about, we're out there around V4, V5, and we're doing these evaluations. Probably should even be before that, but we're out there because that's when most guys get to take a breath. Is when that plant gets around V4 or V5 because they've got all their other plantings finished, whether that be beans, other things that they've got, maybe first herbicide application, then they can take a little bit of breath and they're out there. And so that's when you and I can pull them away and get them out there to start evaluating this. We're constantly, and you and I both have done this, to say, we've asked them to count the ones that you felt are subpar or juvenile or runts or whatever you want to call them. And consistently, we have less plants that are juvenile plants. And so when I say this is really significant, it makes a tremendous difference.
I look at Invigorate, where oftentimes we judge the worth of a product just on this year's benefit. So there are certain things that we do, even though we may not get a response this year. If you test those products multiple years, you find that they consistently do help. There's variability every year on our farms that changes our final yield. And it's something different every year. That's why when we look for silver bullets, everybody wants a silver bullet that every year is going to take me through the top. And that's not feasible because there are too many factors every year that change the impact. We've seen instances where we get a better stand with Invigorate, but if you absolutely get no rain through the rest of the season, those extra plants may not benefit you, and they might even harm you sometimes. That doesn't mean the Invigorate didn't work.
And another thing, Mark, I was in a trial one time in the Invigorate, we were growth stage earlier.
Yeah.
When a frost hit, and this was out in Colorado in a higher altitude, a frost hit actually hurt our plants because we were more advanced. The growing point was out of the ground, and the control was not. So during that advancement, we got dinged. So at the end of the year, we were short as far as our yield. And so that tells me we had greater vigor, more energy coming out. And you and I have done this. We've went out, we've checked collars on plants.
Yeah.
And we maybe, when I say a half a collar more advanced by the time we get to V5. So that's what we have to get out and what we have to take a look at and what we have to evaluate when we're looking at Invigor.
Let's go ahead and step up to the next product. We've got Invigor8 Plus. I know this is a product that you developed a couple of years ago. You've done a lot of testing with it before and even since we've released it. Tell us a little bit more about what Invigor8 Plus.
I'm not very content, even though we've got Invigor8, it's worked really well for us and everything. I'm always looking for an edge. And so we got to talking about what really affects seedlings. And as far as maybe some seedling diseases, dampening off, those type of things, because we're sometimes placing that seed, and let's just say the climate, we're sitting in this room and we've got the thermostat set to where we really feel comfortable. And if we don't, if we got a jacket on or whatever, we may take that jacket off to be comfortable. We'll put that seedling in an environment that it could be somewhat hostile. They could be pathogens there that when that seedling starts to imbibe water starts and it sends out that first root shoot, that, okay, these pathogens start attacking that young seedling.
Mhm.
And so that seedling has to have enough energy and vigor in its own natural defenses to fend that off, or these seedling diseases stun it. I will say stun it or inhibit it from reaching its full potential. So what we started doing, we started looking, okay, what can we do? What type of biological can we put there through competitive exclusion will lower that stress, lessen the stress of the natural fungi or bacteria. It could be whatever there that's detrimental to that young seedling. What can we do to help fend that off?
Mhm.
And so we added this biological compound to the liquid portion of Invigor8. And we're really excited about what we're seeing. One guy that tried it this year, he said, I ended up not putting a check, but he says, I'm not going to need a check because I could see the difference.
Mhm.
We got out of the ground. He said, probably the most uniform stand I've ever had. Now, this is a user of Invigor8.
Mhm.
So he's really sold. In fact, he doesn't test Invigor8 anymore.
Right.
So I said, look, you need to take a look at this to see what it would do in your environment, because we've all got some soils that may stay a little wetter,
Mhm.
may stay prone if we get too much rain to cause us some problems. So that's where this product's really going to shine. We put it in the work in Mississippi, and again, it's irrigated, so it's not a wet environment. And we still saw a significant increase there in the replicated trials in Mississippi, even over, like Josh said a minute ago, even over the standard Invigor8. So we're
Yeah.
excited about this. It costs a little more than in the standard Invigor because of the biological compounds in it, but we're really excited about where this product is going to take us.
Mhm.
I don't want to say that it's probably going to replace the standard Invigor8, but if we keep getting the positive results that we've been getting with this, I don't really see a need for us to maybe keep a standard Invigor8. I think this Invigor8 Plus will just be the go-to product as far as a seed treatment on.
And you mentioned that it is just a little bit higher, Philip, but really it's very minimally higher. Regular Invigor8 this year, I think, figures out to $17.50 per unit of seed treated. And Invigor8 Plus is 20. So it's $2.50 per unit of seed. In most instances, we've definitely seen enough improvement to more than justify that extra investment with Invigor8 Plus.
And one of the things, Mark, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but one of the things that researchers have found is actually the seed treatment on our seed corn when we buy it delays mycorrhiza because of its fungicidal properties. And you know, mycorrhiza is a fungi.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually delays the onset of that. I think really what we're doing with Invigor8 Plus is we're counteracting that. We're getting that balance there on that seedling, so really that the beneficials can latch on to those young roots as that seedling starts to emerge, and we're getting a more beneficial climate there around that seedling.
Just to bounce back on what we said earlier about the Invigorate with the basic formula, as well as you've got to really see the differences to know the product is working. It's tremendously difficult with anything that we do to have expectations months later. So seeing the lack of pressure that could be in that early seedling, whether it be the basic or the plus, trying to see those advantages, definitely capitalizing and going out there and checking off your boxes. Hey, is my target of why I'm using Invigorate, am I achieving that?
Yeah, we want to get as many plants as we can up. We want to grow as big a root system, as big a stalk to produce the biggest plants and biggest ears that we can. And when we talked about different variables every year impacting these crops, when we talk about building a system that you employ every year that gives you that best opportunity to produce that biggest, strongest, healthiest plant, I really think Invigorate fits into that piece of the puzzle really well.
Mark, the numbers coming out of Mississippi, and I know we're looking, and this is 6 different locations. This guy does some really good work for us, 6 different locations, multiple hybrids. We saw 7 bushels with the Invigor8. And we went to 19 with Invigorate Plus.
Mhm.
That's really a substantial change. And that's not our data, that's his data. He wrote a synopsis for us last year. He's going to do that for us this year on what his findings are. And I think that's actually on our website from the work he did last year. So for 2 consistent years for us to start getting or be getting those type of results. And I know everyone says that's not Nebraska or that's not Iowa or whatever, but that's just showing the product works.
Mhm.
And let's get that. And really, it's our start.
Mhm.
Our start is critical to where we end up.
Mhm.
And this is a product that gets us off to a fast start.
Yeah, you bet. Paul had asked if Invigorate is just a seed treatment or if it is, or if we can use it in furrow. And the answer to that is currently it's just a seed treatment product.
That's correct, because of the concentration of this product and to the cost of this product. It really needs to be on the seed
Okay,
to get the performance. It needs to be on the seed.
okay, good deal. There's a lot of conversation in the industry these days about humic and fulvic acids. Obviously, that's what VitaNterra has on the label, is it's a humic and a fulvic mix. Josh, you want to talk a little bit about the makeup of that and maybe why VitaNterra Plus might be different than other things guys are looking at?
Well, and you could look at the label and see the humic fulvic content, seaweed in it for the plus formula now. But looking at any humic fulvic compound, it all comes from what it's derived from. So the way that we look at this, with it being derived from a growing media, essentially we're deriving that as an energy source, composting a growing media to put back on the soil and or the plant, if a plant evaluation is what you're looking at, as true carbon or true energy, where a lot of the Linterdite extracts can measure a trace of humic or fulvic, but the variability of what they're actually doing as an organic or an inorganic compound could be hugely variable. There's maybe 1 or 2 good sources out there in the marketplace that we know where they're mined from, and they're pretty decent. They're hard to work with and they're dirty, but a lot of this other stuff on the market is just a label shop that people are buying because, yeah, it's got this percent fulvic or this percent humic, but it doesn't provide any true benefit because there's no energy, there's no spark, there's not any life in the product. So to further go beyond that is we can test over 40 trace elements in this product. And yeah, you can say that Linterdite's mined out of the soil, so obviously this stuff is in there. The ones in this product are actually plant available. Yeah, they're in minuscule amounts, but much like we talked about yesterday, testing for the elements that we're testing for that we know are beneficial for plant growth, just stimulating that function within the plant is another facet of this product that we get a lot of great benefit out of.
Okay, so talk a little bit about different applications and what kind of impact we're trying to have on the plants or the environment when we're using it in there.
This is where we got into it in the beginning, is the carboxyl groups in here are actually pretty good chelators. We got to putting this with nitrogen. One of the hot topics in 2022 will be nitrogen management, of course. We got into this and got started working with it. So we would put it with any solution that had any nitrogen with it, whether it be a 24 sulfur-based nitrogen, a 28 sulfur-based nitrogen, a 30 or 32% nitrogen. We would put it in there, a 1034O, we would put it in there in our starters. And what we were finding is this compound would help keep that in, it would lock it in there. Even the nitrate forms of nitrogen in these solutions, it changed the charge on it. And so instead of it being a negative charge, it can move through the soil profile, that the charge of the VitaNterra would hold it to the soil colloid. And that was one of the most exciting things when we started out with this, is just using it as a chelator in these certain fertilizers. Then we got into saying, okay, if we do this with it, and we got to working in the foliar aspect of it and what effects it had on plants foliarly. So Josh, I'll let you play on that because you've done a lot with your crops personally.
This is something that in theory should go into every spray application because of how much additional energy that it's got in there. Now it's affecting things differently than what carbose is, because it's actually what I would say a trace of humus, which is what our soil is. So once the VitaNterra interacts with the soil, it's like a supercharger there for that split second. Now, yeah, we could go out and do bricks test or anything like that after an application. And we've done that a lot of times if you want to use bricks as a measuring stick. And yeah, we can manipulate the bricks on the surface of the plant as well, but really it's stimulating the soil more in a different facet than really what anybody's ever looked at before. So it's a positive soil charger. And I think to play on what my dad just mentioned about with adding it with fertility, is we're siphoning a lot of the effects for the soil and the soil biology. That way they correspond with the plant much better, and we don't see some of the negativities out of high salt, high pH of a product, or low pH, depending on what nutrient it is. That it's really making everything healthier, more vibrant, and more available.
Okay, so obviously we've talked really broad spectrum on what we can do with VitaNterra Plus. So let's just walk through some scenarios. We've used VitaNterra Plus in furrow alone and also combined with fertility. And in testing, we see great responses in any of those scenarios.
Yes.
We've talked about using it foliar, combining it. It's part of our foliar feeding program. A lot of guys, again, we've tested it individually and combining it with our microboom and typically carbose is a nice little package for a foliar program early season. We talk about using this in our stress program, right, Phillip?
Yes.
We've got a stress program. If your crop gets hit with hail or wind or different things, because it re-energizes that crop with a foliar application. I've got guys that use it in fertigation scenarios as well, a little bit, especially sometimes in those stress scenarios. Maybe you can't get through a wind damaged field with a sprayer, but you might be able to get over it with fertigation. You can include it there. So it's a really diverse product. Are there any other places that you guys would think that a person might think about using VitaNterra Plus?
Well, one thing would just be as a soil primer, even pre-plant, maybe early spring, once you make them out of your frozen soil or any situation like that, just as a primer, getting your biology kicked off, even before you do any pre-emerge chemistry, potential tillage, anything like that, depending on what program you're under, it would just be a great soil primer.
So let's talk about that a little deeper, Josh. Because organic acids especially, they actually are a food source that biology will feed on. Is that correct? Especially like the smaller molecule fulvic acid is something that some of the biology can nibble on. Is that correct?
That's true. And when we say it's multifaceted, if I thought it, and I'll just say this, it's a bold statement, but if I thought I had any chemistry that due to lack of rainfall during my past season, that I could maybe experience some chemistry stress going into this next crop because of chemical carryover, I would definitely go out with probably at least 64 ounces of this product broadcast to help remediate that, and it will. And it will help in those scenarios because we've actually done it on crops that are experiencing that early in the spring, and we went in and helped remediate that chemical stress. So I would get out there in that situation. If I was looking at, okay, someone talked a minute ago, and it's very variable throughout the US with people I've talked to, they're getting a little bit scared because it ended up as a dry fall. We're coming in now to a dry winter because we're not getting rain or snow. Is that setting us up for a dry spring? And so as we go into that, how much stress is this new crop going to be going under? And we don't have any clue yet, but you mentioned the stress program that we have, Mark, and you mentioned we went in after hail events and we went in after different events, even a wind event, to try to help that crop get back on its feet. It comes from a growing media, a compost that has been used to grow mushrooms. There's so many things there that we can't test for.
Right. Phillip, let's dig just a little bit deeper. You mentioned in your earlier conversations on VitaNterra about the benefits potentially of using it with nitrogen. And obviously, a lot of producers today are moving toward spoon feeding their nitrogen, whether it be wide drop, side dressing, fertigating. Can you talk, you or Josh, I know that Josh, you've spoken about this with me as well before. Where does VitaNterra fit into a nitrogen program and its benefit in those scenarios?
It's much like, Mark, and I used the term yesterday, if it was my farm, and that's what I try to do when I'm talking to anyone. I'm trying to say, okay, if this was my farm, what would I do? To me, I'm not going to put out any nitrogen that doesn't have VitaNterra in it. I'm not, because we've proven it. We know the results. And if I was looking and we talked about, and I'll have a flashback here to Revita N, we talked about reducing our nitrogen rates. If I was going to cut my nitrogen rate back by 25% of what I used in 2021 because of the price, I would definitely, in that 75% of the rate that I used in 2021, I would be sure that VitaNterra was in every gallon of that or every pound of that nitrogen that I put out there. That's just because I've saw the benefits of this and I've experienced the benefits of this. So I wouldn't do it, because Josh threw out numbers of anywhere from 85 cents a pound to $1 and 35 cents a pound. So that's just where we are.
Any thoughts on rates that you would use in those different scenarios at all?
There again, it depends on how deep I'm going to dive into this. If I'm going to go and really reduce my nitrogen rate, I'm going to protect the amount of nitrogen I'm going to put out there. So I may use a higher rate if I'm going to cut back dramatically.
Okay. Josh, you have any input you'd like to add there?
Typically what I've gotten guys to do in the past, what I've done in the past, and we'll mention a couple products here in a little bit, being Stable B and Humic EBC as well, is looking at putting 32 ounces of this product per 30 to 40 pounds of actual nitrogen. So that's always been what I've done to this point with guys. Even the respected rates for Stable B and Humic EBC as well are made to fit those parameters itself. They just have micronutrients with it. Would be to definitely fit in with maintaining your nitrogen, essentially being a stabilizer and also protecting the plant against the potential salt injury, depending on how close we put it to the roots.
Okay. So obviously we've spent quite a bit of time on VitaNterra Plus. We're going to go ahead and move on, but it's a product that everybody needs to consider having somewhere in their programs. Josh, you brought up a good point. We'll talk a little bit more about some other products here in a few minutes for the nitrogen programs too. So Immerse is one that some of you are familiar with. Some of you probably haven't maybe seen a whole lot about this.
This product, even when we first started using it, it was understanding what salts actually do for the plant. Now, we just kick nitrogen and probably kick potassium chloride for having high levels of chloride salt. But what this is doing, much like what I've always called Gatorade for the plant, is we're actually using a salt to draw moisture or retain moisture for the plant itself, whether it be applied in furrow, whether it be applied foliarly, is we're trying to draw moisture, conserve moisture for that plant itself. This is something that I've always liked using, but it's always been the back burner seller as far as the Genesis Ag lineup. But I've got several instances in some what we could call smectic clay soils in the Midwest, where guys have had that compaction, had trouble with water infiltration, and this product has been more of a quick fix for some of those so they can get started in some other avenues. Now, this is a great tandem product to go with something like Revita and Carbos, if that's a starter for some guys, what they're looking for this coming season, because all of the Genesis Ag products are made to work together. So retaining that moisture, it will help with getting oxygen there in the spot of application. So it can help something like Revita N get over some humps or hurdles early in the season. But the biggest thing that I see is that moisture retention and longevity of plant health. So again, we're going to go a lot longer with that hydration.
Phillip, I know I've had some guys who've worked with Immerse in a couple of different scenarios, especially we talked about a stress program a little bit. You've probably had some experience with Immerse in those stress scenarios as well. Where do you really look at Immerse being a great fit?
We've got someone that works with us in our organization that is in some very high value crops. And when those crops get into a stress situation, what we've done, Mark, is we went in with Immerse. If you and I go to the doctor or go to the hospital and they say you're dehydrated, they're going to put you on an IV, and it's going to be a saline solution that they're going to try to get you back hydrated. And so when I use that in a plant, this is what I would do with Immerse, is get that IV to the plant and get that plant rehydrated and get that plant moving. Anytime we're in a stress situation, and we've done this on multiple crops, but again, it's mainly out of the specialty crops, but because those guys are on top of things, not that we aren't growing corn and beans, but they got a high value crop there, and in the first signs of stress, they're going to go into panic mode. And we've even done this when there's too much water. We've done this on crops where basically there's no oxygen in the soil because it goes anaerobic because it's a flooded situation. And we went in and we brought that back with, again, the VitaNterra and the Immerse combination, that you bring that and get that plant back to cycling in its plant cycle. So it's sending out root exudates, because that stops it. And what we want it to do is continue that. And we've also corn that's been rolled up and whatever. And we say, okay, why is it rolling? It's trying to conserve moisture. And does that cycling of the root exudates stop when that corn is rolled up? Yeah, it does. So if we can keep this plant cycling and keep it moving, so it's feeding the biology and the biology is back feeding the plant, it really works in unison. And that's really what we're looking at here.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like more information on this or any other Genesis Ag product or program, please drop us an email at info@genesis.ag. Thank you for joining us and hope you can be with us very soon for the next edition of the Genesis Ag Podcast.